death in Somalia, a Peace Corps for teachers, and the impact of AIDS on the arts. We go now to another part of Africa where the United Nations is having a much harder time working its will. In the East African country of Somalia, a land of 6 million people, there's been a civil war going on for more than a year. The UN tried to arrange a ceasefire recently, but it collapsed. Special correspondent Edward Jaraday reports on the war and the suffering it has brought.
Somalia, an impoverished, arid country largely populated by nomads and farmers. Once colonized by the Italians and British, Somalia later became a strategic pawn in the superpower struggle for the Horn of Africa. For the past 4 months, renewed civil war has raged in and around Somalia's devastated capital, Mogadishu, a city split into north and south by the fighting. Sometimes heavy, sometimes sporadic, it is a meaningless, horrific conflict. Most of the fighters are an undisciplined lot and no more than bandits. Many are stoned on khat, a local narcotic. This uncontrolled fighting has become a grotesque and murderous game. A game relentlessly manipulated by Somalia's feuding warlords, clans, and profiteers. I asked Patrick Verkamen with the French Médecins Sans Frontières whether Somalia is much different from other war situations.
For myself, it's quite different, yes, indeed. I think it's the worst thing I have ever seen in all the different missions I've been. And most of the people say it so also. It's really something, when you arrive, you're really shocked by what you see. Because I think what's really shocking is to see the children and the women arriving totally destroyed by shells or mortars, and also you can see the devastating effect of those automatic war weapons, and that's really really shocked, because I think it's one of the only places where a war like this is happening in the town, and where the background is in fact the Somali population.
We traveled through the ruins of once beautiful Mogadishu's old town, an area this reporter knew well from before the war.
Well, we're now driving through the northern section of Mogadishu down toward the port area, which has been very badly hit during the fighting and is still being hit by shelling. The other side, the other forces are perhaps, I don't know, 300-400 yards away to the right. We're going through this area which includes a lot of the former embassies, various cultural centers, various offices. Both on my left and on the right, there are numerous buildings that have been very badly damaged by the shelling. These main squares where we can also find occasionally bodies lying, skeletons lying on the ground.
More than 500,000 Somalis used to live in Mogadishu, but with the strife, tens of thousands fled to surrounding areas to escape the killing and looting. At the same time, thousands of people from the countryside, many of them nomads, flocked into the capital. They now live where they can, on the outskirts or in the streets. Since the beginning of the year, United Nations Special Representative James Jonah has sought to bring an end to this bitter conflict. For the Somalis demonstrating against the war, the chaos has wrought more destruction than the fighting which preceded the overthrow of former dictator Siad Barre. Very much part of a feudal struggle for power and money, the two rival warlords, including interim President Ali Mahdi, recently signed separate ceasefires. Ali Mahdi favors UN intervention to end the country's lawlessness. But for opponent General Mohammed Aidid, whose supporters control the southern portion of the capital, there is little to gain from a diplomatic solution. Seeking military victory, he is unwilling to accept more than a small and largely symbolic UN monitoring force. Since fighting broke out last November, the two sides have continuously shelled civilian populations. but both Aidid and Ali Mahdi deny that their forces fire indiscriminately on non-military targets, such as these victims.
This is one of the 22 clinics in the northern part of Mogadishu, receiving very little aid from the outside because of the war situation. This afternoon, a number of shells fell in the marketplace, killing 10 people immediately and wounding about 50 to 60 people. 20 or 25 were brought here to this clinic, and the doctors are now treating them in the hospital behind me without anesthetics. Very little medical aid is brought in, and this is the sort of situation they are now facing here in the northern part of Mogadishu.
The Somali volunteer medical teams are often overwhelmed by sheer numbers and the lack of medicine. Orthopedic specialist Steve Henneby of America's International Medical Corps.
We are highly limited in the number of things we can do. We treat most of the patients on the floor. We treat many patients just very briefly because there's many things we just can't do because of no supplies, no equipment, or no people. Almost all the head injuries, we have no facilities or people to treat them, so they're given some basic medications and either live or die. There's nothing we can do for head injuries. Massive chest injuries, there's virtually nothing we can do except a chest tube. The orthopedic injuries, major life-saving surgery isn't really available. We're going not only back to the basics of surgery, we're going back to probably Civil War, United States Civil War surgery, where it's, with the exception that we have antibiotics, but otherwise a lot of our surgery is just put it as close back together and you hope for the best.
Operating under extremely dangerous conditions, a few independent agencies such as IMC, Médecins Sans Frontières, Save the Children, and the Red Cross have been desperately trying to help these civilians. I asked Red Cross nutritionist Ariane Kurdi how people are surviving.
Oh, that's a good question. It's very difficult to answer. Looking at the market prices, you cannot imagine actually how the people are doing it. Also, led to reduced imports of food, to agricultural situation got completely rotten, inducing a very poor food situation in Somalia, meaning that you can find food on the market, but to very, very high prices, and most of the people in Somalia are not able really to buy the daily food anymore.
Without jobs or money, many Somalis simply cannot afford to eat. The lack of water is also a severe problem. To ease the shortage, the Red Cross distributes fuel to help run water pumps. Relief organizations such as UNICEF warn that unless large-scale shipments of food, medicines, and other supplies are brought in, an estimated 4.5 million people may soon be affected by severe shortages. Acute malnutrition is already taking its toll on children. Somali volunteer physician Dr. Hawa feels that without an end to the fighting, the country could face an Ethiopian-scale famine.
These poor people, they are starving, so they don't need work. They need peace. They need food. They need medicine and shelter. Yes, they don't need this work. And also we don't like this.
The United Nations has come under heavy criticism for its poor record in Somalia. Last September, it pulled out following several violent incidents, while the independent relief agencies stayed behind. UNICEF eventually returned, against the wishes of other UN organizations. War or no war, it was felt, the UN should be present. For the moment, the United Nations and other agencies must rely on a limited and expensive airlift. Sufficient supplies, however, can only be brought in by sea. But because of continued fighting, the port of Mogadishu remains inaccessible. UNICEF's Peter McDermott.
There'll be 7 planes, one a day for the next 7 days, trying to bring in over 250 tons of essential medical supplies to Mogadishu South. And at the same time, there's another plane unloading on Mogadishu North. The emergency requires a huge international relief effort, And the NGOs have been doing marvellous work over the last few months. But the needs now are so huge that the United Nations is beginning to gear up its logistic capacity to increase the amount of supplies in Mogadishu. We really feel that the situation in Mogadishu now is at such a crisis point that irrespective of the negotiations, we have to try and attempt to bring in as many supplies as we can, given the very serious security constraints that exist.
But such humanitarian operations are still conducted at risk. Even if the UN is able to dispatch a peacekeeping force to monitor the ceasefire, it will not necessarily be able to stop the fighting and guarantee security. Even with an effective ceasefire, a major problem remains: what to do about all the guns. A massive arsenal provided over the years by the United States, the Soviet Union, and other outside powers. According to the International Committee of the Red Cross, an estimated 30,000 men, women, and children have been killed or injured in recent months, many of them the victims of indiscriminate, wanton violence. Relief agencies are now exploring the possibilities of a large-scale food for guns program in order to reduce the number of firearms in the country. For all too many Somalis, killing for survival or simply for power has become a way of life.